delineate for people some of the options that school choice allows, or the different sections of education that it divvied things up into. You got charter schools, magnet schools, but there are more options than that. What are they?
Yeah, so, in addition to magnets and charters, one of the more insidious options are vouchers. And we saw these in the 1950s, where you're using government money to fund families directly, and they can choose any school they want, more often than not religious private schools. So vouchers really lead to the privatization of schools. Now, during the pandemic, we see online education really taking off, and even homeschooling is an option of school choice.
Yeah, what Supreme Court decision allowed for, I'm blanking on it at this moment. Was there not a Supreme Court decision that was a bit contested about public funds via vouchers going to religious schools?
Yeah, so Zalman v. Harris in 2004 really sort of talk about how, we can use public funding.
Oh, I'm sorry, your audio cut out.
Yeah, we just lost your audio somehow, John. We'll maybe cut to a break real quick, and we'll sort this audio out.
Oh, wait, we hear you now.
It's something it wasn't supposed to.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Yeah, the Zalman v. Harris decision really allows public funding to go to families, and if they wanted to, they can choose to go to a private school. So with this, we see vouchers have a sort of legitimacy in the courts that it's actually legal to do this on smaller scales. But this is just one other choice option that's become validated by the Supreme Court. So we really see more choice in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and so there are a variety of different steps. I guess let's go back to Brown v. Board and some of the justifications that were used there. Like, it's so interesting to see it framed as choice, and for that framing to remain. Black families didn't have a choice. Like, Black families were not a part of the choose whatever school you want to go to so you don't have to integrate your children with other Black kids. Like, that was not an option. Talk about that concept and how heavily racialized it really was from the outset.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And from the very beginning, whites and privileged elite white families really used what they called freedom of choice to avoid desegregated schools. And it was designed by and for elite, wealthier white families to say, the government has no right to tell me where to go to school. And if I don't want to go to school, a desegregated school, if I don't want to go to school with Black students or students of color, I have a right of freedom of association, was the legal argument, to where I am choosing to spend my time with whom I choose to spend my time with. And upon this principle, they developed this idea of school choice. It's my choice where to go to school. The government cannot tell me where to go to school. And especially for some social experiment like desegregation, that families should have a right to opt out of that. So from the very beginning, it's a way to avoid desegregated schools. It's a way to dictate at your own level where you want to go to school. And from that, it just sort of builds upon that very principle. And to your point, you're exactly right, where people of color and Black families did not have that choice, right? They weren't involved in the process of coming up with freedom of choice, that we choose where to go. Black families just wanted to go to a school that they wanted to because they were prevented by law from attending that school. Freedom of choice is something very different that whites are using to avoid desegregation. So from the very start, it's a policy to avoid desegregation, and it's also a rhetorical way to talk about race without having to talk about it, right? So especially during busing in the 1970s, say, I don't want to go to that school because it's my choice not to go. You don't have to say you don't want to go to school with children of color. It's a more convenient way that's palatable across the nation.
Yeah, I'm reminded of other discussions we had on this show about the notion of taxpayer, right? Which is also heavily racialized. I'm contributing taxes. I own property during this era where property taxes the income tax wasn't around. I own property. I'm the one who's should be, and people like me are the only people who should be having a say in our government, and everyone else should basically be grateful. These are just notions we repeat today: choice, taxpayer, that have so much baggage and weight behind them in terms of like the racial resentment caked in to those terms. But your book talks about Milton Friedman a bit, and it all seems to come back to him in the end, unfortunately for us. He was a huge advocate for this concept back in the day. Talk about his influence over this debate.
Milton Friedman, and a lot of people are very upset to this day when you make this association. Milton Friedman was critical in bringing school choice to a national level, because up until this point, you had segregationists in Virginia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, the former Confederacy, using freedom of choice as a way to very blatantly avoid going to desegregated schools. Milton Friedman, as an award-winning economist in the University of Chicago, provides gravitas, a way to talk about school choice at a different level. And when he starts talking about it, folks in Chicago, New York, Boston, northern cities have new language to use when desegregation comes to their cities. So when Chicago and Boston don't want to desegregate, Milton Friedman's talking about an educational marketplace. He's talking about the right of taxpayers to use their own money in ways that they see fit. So Milton Friedman provides a new language to not sound like Southern segregationists. He provides a new way of talking about it. And he also provides this economic theory, which says, let's put competition into this public school system. Let's provide innovative teaching and innovative schools to improve the whole system. So he's introducing not only a new way of talking about it, but in a new theory about how we should run schools. And this is what's really taken off today.
Well, you can see very prominent shades of that in the way that like liberals in the North talk about school choice. We saw during the same time, as you write, a mass exodus of white people, particularly affluent white people from cities to suburbia, which I think also was paired with the notion that public education can be circumvented for my special child. So I guess talk about his influence over that particular regional discourse and a bit of how that still remains today.
Yeah, so Milton Friedman, in choice itself allows people to, use a new way of talking about it, where I have a right to go to school wherever I want to go. And especially as taxpayers, right? I'm allowed to move to the suburbs now and go to schools and have a stronger say where I want to go. So in many ways, it becomes this sort of worldview that people have about schools. Schools should be run like a business. And as a taxpayer, as a consumer, I have a right to determine what that product should look like. And it's very influential, especially in the North, because in the city of Chicago, for instance, we have massive white flight out of the city. And we have these arguments about taxpayers. Well, I pay taxes and we should have a stronger say in how this works, right? So it's it's a different way of talking about it than the Southern segregation approach, which is to put police in front of the doors and not allow Black children into the school. It's an economic argument that people use that benefits supposed taxpayers, which is coded for whiteness. Right? If you're a legitimate citizen, if you're paying taxes, that's a way to sort of say that, and to use taxpayers, that phrase itself is a way to talk about it. So it's privileging white, wealthy families to determine what our school system looks like at a time when it should become more equitable, because that's what the Brown decision said.
Well, it's also just enthusiastically embracing like the purest form of that Friedmanomics neoliberal economic ideology and applying it to these like basic social foundational structures that should be completely immune from that kind of thinking. Unfortunately for us, it wasn't that way over the past few decades.
Well, and also the idea that, it's based on this assumption that, when you look at an education marketplace, it's all based on the assumption that these parents or these individuals are consumers to draw on this language and rhetoric, will act rationally. But as Friedman's writing this in the city of Chicago, he can see white vigilante groups attacking Black families who are moving into white neighborhoods. He can see apartments in Cicero burning. He can see Dr. King talking about Chicago being worse than any place in the South that he's ever visited. People are not acting rationally when they're choosing and selecting schools. So that argument goes out the window when you can just look outside of his office at University of Chicago and see people acting not only irrationally, but violently to avoid going to desegregated schools. So the whole theory is corrupt from the start because people will not act rationally when it comes to where they send their kids to school.
Jon, you sound like you're being very irrational. I'm joking.
Right, yeah. You can see the mail I'm getting too.
Right, exactly. Hey, I'm familiar with that.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.